how he's doing, and
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Now it's asked for permission to record.
brilliant.
Okay, which I've given. Okay.
You too. So, good afternoon, Michael. It's lovely to have you here with me and here for the interview to ask questions, which I think a lot of people are anticipating the answers to. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes. Okay. So my name is Michael Green, and these days, amongst other jobs or other activities, I act as an advisor to Sterling Education, and I've been doing a bit of work recently for Sterling in connection with Iraq, also with Bosnia, and I'm currently working also with British Council in Iraq on a project to develop academic links with UK universities. I do, although I worked for 40 years, I think almost, in higher education, mostly running international offices. So I was in international recruitment from probably right from the very beginning of UK international recruitment engagement, and so I guess I've seen lots of trends come and go, lots of countries come and go, and probably the most useful things that I can bring certainly to Sterling is perspective. You know, I have plenty of contacts, I have plenty of experience, and hopefully some of it will be useful. But my main priority is and always has been helping students to maximize their potential. That's why I got into student recruitment, not to make money for universities, but to help smart people maximize their potential. And lots of people now who were my students 10 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, those people are now in different countries around the world. A lot of them are in very good jobs in universities or in government. And that's actually why I find that I'm a bit busier now than I actually would like to be at my age, you know, because a lot of my former students are contacting me and asking me for this or that or helping me. It's very nice to see how people have progressed in their lives and to feel that you play some kind of a role in helping them to be successful. And yeah, that's, and I think with Sterling Education, it's probably similar too. You know, I'm keen to help Sterling do a good job in terms of helping smart people to maximize their potential. And yeah, that's really what it's about.
Brilliant. Well, then you're the perfect person to speak to, considering your connections and your experience with universities, and obviously having the links that you do to your previous students. I think there's no better person to speak to than you. So I guess we're very lucky to have you on board and be having this discussion with you.
Well, I'll do my best to answer your questions. Fire away.
Thank you. Well, I'll quickly shoot and introduce myself. So I'm Sarah, and I am the Communications and Marketing Manager at Sterling Education. I've been working with Sterling for about a year now, and I deal with the marketing side of things, the social media side of things. We work on a lot of projects together with Sterling, and our main focus right now is helping students who are abroad who may want to come to the UK and study, and that maybe just don't know how to go about it or are a bit confused about the process, because as you can imagine, being an international student, being in a foreign country and trying to go to a country that speaks a different language, has a different system, can be quite overwhelming and daunting for many students. So I think just having a few questions, which are the most common ones, answered, and clearing up any maybe misconceptions people have or any kind of confusion that people may have regarding studying in the UK. And this is what this session essentially will be about. So if you're ready, I can begin by shooting straight into the questions that we had, the most common ones. Yep. Obviously, as you can imagine, we have a lot of questions, well, we've had a lot of questions, but we've had to kind of break it down to the most common ones so that we can fit everything in. So with the first question I will go into is, will language support be provided if I'm still working on improving my English?
Yes, that sounds like a simple question, but it's there's a lot of aspects to this question, because First of all, of course, you need to be eligible for a student visa to study a full-time course in the UK. We're talking about Tier 4 visa. For this, you need to have an offer from a licensed student sponsor, which will be an education institution offering the course of study at the level you wish to follow, whether it's A-level, foundation, HND, undergraduate or postgraduate. So one of the requirements for issue of the visa is that you should meet the minimum English level for the course concerned. So you need to pass a secure English language test like IELTS before you can become eligible for the Tier 4 visa. So assuming that you've reached the minimum level of English for your Tier 4 visa, you've got an offer from a university, and you've arrived in that university, then we can answer the question. It's quite simple. Once you've joined your academic program, certainly at university level, every university that I know of offers you the chance to improve your academic writing, your reading, your listening skills during your studies by attending extra classes. And in general, these classes are free of charge, perhaps 3 or 4 hours a week of specialist academic English training. But you know, the biggest challenge is really to meet the English requirement that has been set by the university, so that you can apply for your visa. Is that kind of, it's a long answer to a short question, but in-sessional, in-course academic English is almost always provided, because it's in the university interest to make sure that you're successful on your course.
Of course. Well, thank you for that. I think a lot of students tend to have concerns about, you know, they've met the requirement to enter and study at a UK university, but then they worry about coming here and maybe having that kind of conversational English to get around and, you know, to be able to communicate with people and, you know, outside of academic English. So
that's a totally different matter. Universities only give academic English support classes. There's no shortcut to social English. You just have to meet people, interact with people. Look, I studied long ago. I studied in several different countries in a different language. I spent 4 years in Germany. I spent a year in Sweden. I spent a year in Holland. Each time I had to learn the language. I had to pass an exam to get the visa and to get into the universities. But it didn't help at all, really, for normal social interaction. The only way you can do that is by jumping straight in, trying to interact with as many people as possible, listen to them. You can't speak until you understand. You can't respond. So the most important thing is listening skills.
Definitely, I would agree.
So take every possibility to listen to every kind of English in the shops, on TV, going to movies, hanging out with friends in the coffee bar. And it doesn't happen overnight, you know. If you come in a 1-year master's course and you just have the basic IELTS score, you should be realistic about what you can expect to achieve, you know, in 1 year. If you come in an undergraduate course or a PhD course, then from my experience, to develop a good level of conversational English, including listening skills, social skills, it takes 1 year. It really takes 1 year. Yeah. You know, that was my experience in Germany and Holland and other countries, you know. And you have to work at it too. It doesn't come easily.
Cool. So essentially what you're saying is you have to immerse yourself in the culture, in the environment.
Absolutely. Don't hang out with people from your own country. You know, as you probably know, there've been huge numbers of Chinese students that come into the country in recent years to study for mostly master's degrees. Now, most of them, and I looked after a lot of them, you know, the day that they leave UK after ending the course, their conversational English is probably worse than when they arrived.
Really?
Because they hang out only with other Chinese. They eat with them, they socialize with them, they chat with them, they discuss their assignments with them. They don't mix. So that's a cultural thing, of course, too, and that's their decision. Actually, they don't really care that much, you know, because they're going home.
Yeah, of course.
But if it's a priority to develop social skills and social networks outside your own group, then you have to immerse yourself, and you need to be brave, you know.
I agree.
Mm.
Brilliant. Thank you for that answer. Moving on to the next question, and this is quite a common one that people wonder about. Can you work while studying in the UK?
That's an easy one, of course, and that's a short answer for that one. You can work 20 hours a week during term time. You can work full time during vacation periods if you're on a university course.
Okay.
That's my understanding. That hasn't changed. That regulation hasn't changed for several years.
Brilliant. Short and sweet and simple. I think that's quite straightforward. And I guess coming to the UK, will students have any kind of direction from the universities when it comes to working? Will there be any aid in that sense?
In general, no, because there are usually very, very few work options on campus. Sometimes if you're lucky, but the vast majority of international students, from my experience, if they're working during their studies, they're working in coffee shops, restaurants, working evenings, working on the checkouts in supermarkets in the evenings or weekends. This kind of job, you know. So it's minimum wage job, but minimum wage is not bad in UK, and it fits with the study schedule. You know, evening work, weekend work. Certainly in University of Leicester, where I used to run the international office, I used to constantly meet my students working in restaurants in the city whenever I went out for a meal somewhere, you know. Yeah, and that seems to work well enough.
Okay, that's good. It's good for students to at least know that coming here, they'll have some sort of financial backup if needed, and that option is available to them.
There's generally no checking though, especially if you work casually in somewhere like a restaurant. I don't think there's any way to check whether you're working 20 hours or 30 hours or 40 hours, you know. But if you work more than 20 hours full time during term, it's going to hit your studies for sure.
Yeah. So just a warning to students, don't work longer than you're supposed to. Essentially, you're here to study, so that should be the main priority.
If you come to study, if your priority is study and the study outcome, then you should respect the 20 hours limit, and you can still work full time during vacation. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you for that. So moving on to the third question, how are UK universities ranked and rated?
That's an interesting question too. UK universities are ranked by various highly respected surveys, which are conducted annually and they're revised every year. So each of these surveys uses rather slightly different criteria to rank universities. Some of them emphasize graduate employability, others the degree completion rates, others research reputation, and then others still, they emphasize things like the study environment, staff-student ratios, the social environment, you know, how good is it for parties and stuff like that, you know. So there's a big variation in the rankings. The main rankings, from my experience, used by UK applicants to universities, it's probably the Times Higher Education rankings. Another two which are commonly used would be the Guardian rankings and also the Complete University Guide rankings. Students studying at postgraduate level tend to use QS rankings, or Chinese one called Shanghai Jiaotong, or Times Higher Education rankings, because these rankings emphasize research and international reputation. So people who are looking to study in a university where there's quite a high credibility internationally, they will usually use those rankings, QS, THE, or Shanghai. Having said that, the top 10 or 15 UK universities are always pretty much the same in the terms of the ranking places, regardless of which set of rankings you look at. Maybe just changing rank by one or two places at most. The bottom ranked universities are usually very similar, not much change. It's the ones in the middle who are a little bit, who tend to fluctuate, especially if you look at individuals, dig down and look by subject reputation rather than general reputation. Does that kind of answer that question?
Definitely. And I think you touched on something very important in the beginning, where you said that obviously, depending on what you're looking for, you'll find a rank for it. So, for example, if you're looking for nightlife or party life, then universities will rank differently based on that. If you're looking for graduate employability, then you'll have, a different sort of ranking system or education-based ranking. So, what you're looking for essentially is the kind of ranking you're going to find, and that would vary across the board, is what you're saying.
That's pretty much the case, and there. I mean, there's a big selection of rankings to look at, but as I said, if you're going for the top 15 or so universities, or the bottom 20, most rankings will pretty much be very similar. It's the ones in the middle which will vary, particularly by subject area, because middle ranked universities, they might not be great for every subject, but they will mostly have like one or two subjects which they might be world class in. I mean, think of like a university like Bradford University, for example, which wouldn't normally be top of many people's priority list for most subjects. However, they happen to be probably the number one university in the UK for archaeology, especially archaeology related to digital cultural heritage, which is a very hot area now in a lot of countries. For museum collections, for helping local communities to develop their cultural assets online to attract tourism. So depending on the subject area, people might need to dig quite deep. But anyway, that's pretty much how UK universities are ranked and rated, I think.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that. That's very interesting. The next question is about personal statements. So what is a personal statement and what should I include in it?
Well, personal statement, of course, it may be a little bit different depending on whether you're applying for undergrad study or postgraduate study. In any case, it's part of the application process. And it's a chance for you to try to make your application stand out a little bit from the others by showing maybe how your skills or your ambitions make you a good fit for the course to which you're applying. Having said that, the personal statement is more important where there's real competition for a place on a particular course, like in a top 20 university at postgrad level. The personal statement will often be used as a kind of tiebreaker when allocating places. In general, undergraduate level, and especially at universities which are in the bottom half of the overall rankings, it really is not that important, to be honest, as long as you meet the minimum academic criteria for your chosen course. And I know from my own experience that interacting with admissions tutors, that especially when they're faced with hundreds and hundreds of applications, sometimes for especially an undergrad course, they will hardly look at, in most cases, at the personal statement, because especially at undergrad level, your personal statement is often a cut and paste job. Everyone writes the same thing almost, So that's another thing I would recommend, that it doesn't look good if you've either simply copied somebody else's statement or cut and pasted something that's easily available online. It's much better always to personalize it and take a few risks. Really try to make yourself look a little bit different to other people. But in general, personal statement is more critical for the top universities at all levels of study and for most universities at postgraduate level. Postgrad level will expect you to know what you're talking about in the subject. Undergrad level, you don't know anything much, You're you're basically a school kid, and you might have some idea about the subject concerned, but they don't expect you to know much about it. And I would say I used to see hundreds of them every year coming across my desk, and less than 10% would be would be seriously personalized. Most of them are just kind of cut and paste jobs, and it's not a good idea. To be blunt, it doesn't support your application. It's better to take a few risks, even if you make a few mistakes with your English, you know, rather than something that's beautifully written but actually says nothing or says the same as everybody else.
So if you could pinpoint 3 main points that you'd suggest to students in terms of what to include, would you be able to break it down into 3 several points?
First of all, really try to talk sincerely about why you have chosen that particular course in that particular university. Show that you have done your homework a little bit, and you're not just saying the same thing to everybody, because nobody likes to be, everybody wants to think that they're a little bit special, even admissions tutors who see hundreds, if not thousands, of these applications every year. If they do read the personal statement, if there's something at the beginning of in the first few lines which catches the attention, because if it doesn't catch the attention in the first few lines, they probably won't look at it at all. So, it has to be, people should think about their motivation, and they should think about how they can catch the attention of the reader in the first 2-3 sentences. That's it. For postgraduate, it's much more important to talk about. They want to know about your professional background. They want to know about your training and how your training fits with the course that you want to do. Yeah. So, yeah. Try to catch their attention, talk about the motivation, and if you're postgrad, then emphasize your professional background and how that fits with the course concerned.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think a lot of people probably don't think about the beginning of a personal statement. They just kind of go into it with something very typical, but they don't realize that actually if you put something eye-catching or very interesting in the beginning, then you're more likely to have the admissions tutor read your personal statement and look further into you.
And never just download something that's available online as a generic statement and try and tweak it a little bit to fit yourself, fit your own background, because most people are doing that, especially at undergrad level, and it looks terrible.
I would have never thought that people were actually doing that. So that's interesting. I thought they were very strict against, plagiarizing or finding something on the internet.
But yes, but it's not plagiarizing, it's your application. And, people are, you would be surprised, even at postgraduate level, how many personal statements in an application form are clearly cut and pasted from some template. And it really annoys academics, especially serious academics, when they see this. They think, well, if they're going to do this in their personal statement, what will they do when they're a student?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So just be yourself. Don't oversell yourself, which a lot of people do. And it doesn't work either, because experts can see through that very quickly. Just be yourself. Talk about your motivation. Be realistic about it. Don't talk about it. Don't try to present yourself as a genius. Nobody expects you to be a genius at that stage. You're coming to be trained as a specialist or whatever. So just be yourself and try to be a little bit original, and try to put yourself in the position of the person who has to look at these, especially if they've got a pile of like 100 sitting on the desk, which has to be filtered through within a couple of days, because that's not fun, and academics don't like it.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that answer. That's a very interesting one. I hope it shows a different perspective to what is important in a personal statement. For the next question, it comes down to UCAS. So what is UCAS? How would you describe what UCAS is?
UCAS, okay, well, UCAS is, of course, is short for University Central Admission System. And it applies only to applications for undergraduate degrees. So almost all UK applicants for university will apply through UCAS. For Oxford, Cambridge, and other most medical courses, I think the deadline is normally October in each year for the following October. For other courses, the deadline is normally end of January. And applications are submitted online. You have to pay a fee on submission of your application online. I think this year the fee was £22.50 or something, something like that. If you select only one university to apply to, but you can select up to 5 courses at 5 different, or maybe 5 courses you can select at different universities. And I think if you select up to 5, it's £27, at least this year. So then what UCAS does is they circulate all those applications to the universities which you've selected, and they act as the go-between. So whenever a decision is made, UCAS will tell you. And they will tell you what the conditions are as well. So that's pretty much what UCAS is. Sorry, hold on a second. I'm just trying to call me. I'm just killed it. Yeah. So there's a second way to apply through UCAS, which is usually more relevant for international students because often they don't have their exam results by the UK deadline. That's called clearing, and if you apply after June the 30th for entry in October that year, then you go into this clearing system. Clearing applications are circulated to all universities which have notified vacancies to UCAS in different subject areas. So basically, you go into a big pot of vacancies, and any university which thinks that they might be able to offer you a place will get in touch directly. And that's very often the way that international students apply, because also international students often don't, they're not in a position for one reason or another, including the visa requirements and the English requirements, to get an unconditional offer from a university in the UK until much later in the cycle. So clearing is I think, from my experience, very, very common for applicants from many countries. Having said that, especially later in the cycle, from about June onwards, a lot of UK universities are prepared to accept direct applications from international students. But you have to check the website of your chosen university for that. What this boils down to is that really UCAS is very much geared up to UK students. International students can use it. If they use it, they're more likely to use it in clearing from like June onwards. But at the same time, international students, in most cases, are also able to apply directly to universities using specific application forms from those universities. And for that, if you want, let's say you wanted to go to engineering in Nottingham, for example, and you really decided you want to do engineering in Nottingham, then you don't no need to go through UCAS. You can go to Nottingham website, you can download an application form for engineering in Nottingham, and then you will then be assessed directly by somebody from the engineering school. Normally, in these cases, they will do a little video interview with you. They'll do a Zoom call or a WhatsApp call to check you out, having looked at your applications. That's instead of the personal statement, and it's more reliable as well, obviously, because you can't fake it. You can't fake the call, you know.
Yeah, well, it's good that now hopefully students have clarification on what UCAS is and how, as international students, they can alternatively apply directly from the university's website themselves. So now we're just going to move on quickly to accommodation. A lot of
Mhm.
people ask about what type of accommodation is available. How would you explain that to them?
That's another interesting one because, first of all, probably every UK university offers a range of its own accommodation, either on campus or very close to the campus. That will vary in price according to the level of facilities offered. You know, if you want shared facilities, just kitchen and bathroom, or you want something really fancy like an ensuite with your own kitchen and whatever, you know. And so and it also varies according to location. If the university is in a more rural place, then the accommodation will be cheaper. If it's in a big city, it's going to be priced at city standards. Um, Generally speaking, now in the larger university cities, there's a lot of private providers which have opened up alternative uh, and usually very high quality accommodation for students. And most of this accommodation is also located in this very centrally and close walking distance to the campuses. And so that's another option, and it's usually cheaper than university accommodation. So it depends on what kind of accommodation you want, whether what kind of accommodation you can afford. But in general, if you're an undergrad student and you're coming for your first year, most universities will guarantee on-campus accommodation to undergrad students, whether they're UK or international. And it's a good idea usually if you're coming straight from home, especially from another country, to try to go into a university environment for first year. Second year onwards, you know your way around, you've made friends. Most people then will move out and they'll rent a house in the private market. 3 or 4 people will rent a house together, and that works out vastly cheaper. One important point to mention, if you stay in university accommodation or you stay in accommodation from one of the private competitors, is you'll be tied into a contract for a full academic year, and they won't let you out. If you leave for whatever reason, they'll still expect you to pay out the whole contract. If you're sharing a house with 3 or 4 friends, then there are different legal requirements, but normally you'll have a tenancy agreement for maybe 9-10 months with the owner, and all of you will be collectively liable for paying the rent. So if somebody runs away, everybody else will have to pay their share.
Don't do that, basically, is what you're saying. Make sure not to do that.
Well, yeah. Very few international students stay in university accommodation beyond the first year. If you're a postgrad student, then you'll normally come for 1 year only anyway. So, and most of them, they prefer to just stay in university halls then because they can go to the library anytime and the focus is on their studies. And it's probably a bit quieter generally too. But university accommodation generally, compared to private sector alternatives, I would say typically a premium of about 20%.
Okay.
Depending on rooms. So a lot depends on your budget. If you have networks in the country already, for example, there are some nationalities such as, especially Indian students, from my experience, they usually have their networks, personal networks, friends, or whatever, in the university concerned before they arrive. And one generation of Indian students will normally pass on the same house to the next generation, you know. So, and that works very well for them. Other nationalities, especially Middle Eastern nationalities, some Gulf, Saudi, especially if they're female, it's usually very important for them for many reasons to be able to stay in university, secure university accommodation. So, yeah.
Brilliant. I think we've got several good points there that people can reflect
on. Many choices. it depends on your personal preferences, it depends on your financial situation. But it's not cheap these days, to stay in university accommodation or in private sector accommodation, and you are tied in to the contract for quite a long time, for the full period.
Okay.
So
Well, thank you.
look at the small print before you sign up.
Important tip. Look at the small print.
So it's a test of English as well,
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah.
I'm just going to move on to the last question, and that is about the percentage of students that make up international students. So what is the percentage of international students in the UK?
That's a very interesting question, yeah.
Quite specific too.
Yeah, and it's again, it's one of those ones which is there's no single answer to. First of all, people need to be aware that the government is now looking at student numbers, international student numbers, as an easy way to cut down migration numbers into the UK, and therefore meet their promises before the election comes next year. So it's already looking like they're going to be tightening up on this very soon. And I think over the next, my advice would be for students to keep a very close eye on this situation. For example, if you want to bring dependents with you for study, I have a feeling that that's going to be made very, very difficult quite soon. If you're coming from a country where there's a track record of students staying on and looking for asylum, again, that's going to be made very, very difficult. So the other big issue, contributing factor to student migration numbers, is that there's a 2-year post-study work visa in place at the moment for international students. And that is not only it's not only something that makes UK much more attractive to many nationalities as a destination for study, but it's one of the areas which I think is going to be looked at by the government as well. I wouldn't be at all surprised if the 2-year post-study work visa is gone by this time next year as well. That will have a massive impact on university recruitment, especially from certain countries. But it's been abused, and everybody knows it's abused. Again, some nationalities do it more than others. But anyway, it's a soft target. So things could change dramatically quite quickly. Okay, now looking at the current situation in the UK in respect of full-time degree study, full-time study on postgraduate taught or postgraduate research courses, sorry, in UK universities is absolutely dominated by international students. So typically 60 to 80%, some cases even higher than that, the course composition will be international students. What this means is that many postgraduate taught courses won't be viable economically if, for whatever reason, the government changes the rules and the numbers of international students on these courses take a hit. Then you have to dig down by subject area. Typically, engineering and IT courses at postgraduate taught level are very heavily dependent on students from the Indian subcontinent. Postgraduate taught courses in business and management, media, very heavily dependent on students from China. At undergraduate level, the situation is a lot different. So higher ranked universities don't really need international students at all, except for diversity purposes on their undergrad courses, because they can fill all the available places through UCAS. Lower ranked universities, they struggle to fill their undergraduate places on many courses from the UK, so they will be extremely keen to recruit from anywhere, UK or overseas. So it really has to be divided up by category of university, by subject area, by level of study. But postgraduate taught is very, very, very dependent across the board on international student recruitment. And lab-based subjects are especially vulnerable because they're very expensive to run as well. Now, there is, however, of course, if you go to each university's website, it will give, if you dig down, it will tell you somewhere what percentage of students are international. And it might tell you what percentage of international students will be on your chosen course. However, what I know is that there's a group of universities in the UK which are perhaps in the bottom 50 or 40 ranking, and their overall international student numbers on all levels exceeds 50% of the total student numbers. In other universities, yeah, you really have to go onto the website, and top universities, they will always give you this information. It's always quite easy to get. They will break it down by subject, by nationality even. Usually if you go to the international office website, it will tell you. So if, for example, you come from China and the last thing you want is to be on a postgrad taught course where 90% of the other students are Chinese, you'll be able to find that out. And you can choose a course which is much more diverse in terms of the nationalities which are on the course. So overall, the answer to your question is UK higher education is very, very dependent on international student recruitment.
Thank you.
Some subjects more than others, some universities more than others. And that's why the government is going to, I think, take quite serious action in the next 12 months to make it more difficult for international students to come to the UK. So not necessarily good news for universities or for international students. But
I think that's a lot of interesting perspective that you've shared with us and a lot of insight. And I would honestly say that I've probably learned a lot from hearing your perspective on this as well. So thank you for sharing that information with us. I'm sure it's very useful to people across the board, no matter what subject they want to go into, no matter what university they'd like to come to in the UK. Lots of encouraging words, lots of interesting information, and hopefully information they can take on board as part of their application process.
Yeah, did you have another question about Freshers Week or something?
That was going to be the last question, but because of time issues, I would maybe consider, even if we do a part 2, maybe with more questions at a
different time. Yeah, we can do, or we can do a follow-up if you want to. Once you've kind of edited today's content, if there are things that are missing or things you'd like to focus on or dig down more deeply into.
I mean, there are countless questions. I'm sure you know this is a very interesting topic for students who are applying to university. So questions are constantly coming. So we can definitely do a series where we talk about these things a lot more and go into other questions as well.
It might be interesting sometime to do a session which is focused on particular subject areas or a particular level of study as well. Because there's no one size fits all, you know. That's the point.
That would definitely be an idea to think on. Thank you for that suggestion. And thank you for your time with us today, Michael. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone else that watches this will appreciate your advice and your tips that you've shared with us. So thank you again for that. And I look forward to doing more of these, hopefully in the future.
Okay. All the best now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Take care and have a great day, Michael.
Bye.
Bye-bye.